Now that we understand the setup, let's come back to the overarching question of whether the professor should in fact do his or her own typing. To do this, let's think about a production possibilities frontier, both for the professor by himself, for the secretary by himself, or for the two of them together. So here we have a production possibilities frontier for the secretary by him or herself, the professor for by him or herself, and then for the two of them working together. We can see here that given the secretary's trade-offs, and also assuming that we have 10 hours a day available, the secretary can choose to either produce 1 page of research, 20 pages of typing, or some combination of those two things. You'll notice that the slope of the production possibilities frontier for the secretary is -1/20, which just represents the opportunity cost of typing in terms of research. When the professor is working by himself, we have a trade-off in that he could either produce 10 pages of research, 1 page an hour for 10 hours, or he could produce 40 pages of typing, 4 pages an hour for 10 hours, or some combination thereof. Again, his production possibilities frontier has a slope of -1/4, which represents his opportunity cost of typing in terms of research. When we have the two parties working together, on the other hand, we can get an interesting result. We said before that it made sense to assign people to the task for which they had the lower opportunity cost. So in this case, we would want to first assign the secretary to the task of typing before we would assign the professor to the task of typing. If we were to assign the secretary to typing while the professor still did research, we would reach a point here with a total of 10 pages of research produced by the professor and 20 pages of typing completed by the secretary. Note here that the slope for this part of the production possibilities frontier is just the opportunity cost for the secretary of typing in terms of research. As we move further down, we get to the point where both the professor and the secretary are doing only typing. For this part of the production possibilities frontier, the slope is -1/4, which represents the professor shifting over from research to typing, which he can do at an opportunity cost of 1/4 of a page of research for each page of typing. So why is this specialization of labor helpful in terms of the amount of output produced? Well, if you look at the graph, this dotted line represents the set of points where we don't have any sort of trade to be had. We just have the professor and the secretary independently moving along the spectrum of how many hours they spend doing research versus how many hours they spend typing. The point that I labeled here is the point at which both the professor and the secretary spend half of their time on each activity. Since they're spending half of their time, or 5 hours, on each activity, the professor gets 5 pages of research done, and the secretary gets 1/2 of a page of research done, for a total of 5.5 pages of research. Similarly, for typing, the professor, 4 pages per hour for 5 hours, gets 20 pages of typing done, and the secretary, at 2 pages an hour for 5 hours, gets 10 pages of typing done. Put those together and we get a total of 30 pages of typing. So this point here is where each person is spending half of their time on each activity. But notice here how the specialization of labor can make the economy do better, because we can move from this point here to this point out here on the production possibilities frontier through trade. This point here is clearly better for the simple reason that we are getting more production of both of the goods in our economy. Let's think about one more question regarding labor specialization, comparative advantage, and the gains from trade. Since in most economies we think about prices, not just the assignment of people to the production of goods and services, since prices really are what drives a lot of this economic behavior, we want to ask ourselves what prices of typing are going to induce trade, in that the professor is going to want to pay the secretary to type rather than to do research. In this setup, we're using the term prices somewhat loosely, hence the air quotes, because we're not talking specifically in terms of dollars. We haven't introduced currency into this economy yet. But we're talking about prices for typing in terms of research. The answer is that any price for a page of typing between 1/5 of a page of research and 1/4 of a page of research will be acceptable to both parties and will in fact induce trade. For these sets of prices, the professor will in fact want to pay the secretary to type rather than having her spend her time on some combination of research and typing. Well, let's think about why this is the case. Let's come back to our opportunity costs. If we look over here, we see that the cost to the professor of a page of typing is 1/4 of a page of research. Well, he would want to pay the secretary to do his typing if the price was lower than his own cost. So he's willing to pay anything up to 1/4 of a page of research. The secretary, on the other hand, has a cost of typing of 1/5 of a page of research. So in order for her to be willing to give up some research and do more typing, she has to at least be compensated for that cost. So she'll be willing to agree to any prices above 1/5 of a page of research, which is how we get the fact that anything above 1/5 of a page of research and below 1/4 of a page of research will induce trade in our very simple economic model.